The Sundowner's Dance is a book about grief. It's about loss. It's about starting over. It's about mortality. It's also about worms. And I'm not going to give you more context than that, but the elevator pitch for that we pitched to publishers, and that ultimately what got us in the door at Shortwave, is Sundowner's Dance is Cocoon meets The Color Out of Space.
Starting out, I usually don't ask people the whole, like, what was the inspiration for the story. But in this case, as I was reading The Sundowner's Dance, one thing kept occurring to me, and that's that this felt very personal. Like there was a fear in this book that came from a place that you understood. And so I was trying to think about, like, for I'd listened to you talk in the past about your books and you know, some of your personal life and stuff. And I was trying to make connections to, like, what's the personal thing? And then I could have just read the afterword or your acknowledgments and it was right there. So there's a pretty straightforward inspiration for where the original short story kind of started, I believe, and then it kind of just grew into this big fucking amazing book, which, by the way, when I finish this book, I'm going to give you a chance to talk. When I finish reading this, there's a group of, like, book influencer people that I talk to regularly, and I just went right to them and I said, oh my God, Sundowner's Dance is fucking awesome. So
thank you.
Right up front, dude, this book just knocked me out. But what I'd like to explore, as much as you're comfortable with, is talking about what was the original kernel for this story.
Sure. There are two. So I'll get to the simpler one first, and then I'll, expand into the second, more important one. The first was a sentence that popped into my head. The worms in my brain dance at nightfall. As a matter of fact, I actually shared this on social media earlier, late last night, actually. It popped up in my memories on Facebook of the Post-it note that I wrote it on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want to dig into, like, where that came from, there was this web comic that I used to follow when I was in college, called The Parking Lot is Full. And the archives are almost completely wiped from the internet. I've tried the Wayback Machine to find this, but there was this one. It was kind of like The Far Side, but way darker and way more cynical. And there was this one of this professor writing a complex formula on a chalkboard in front of his, this auditorium. And the whole point of the comic was that the kids aren't paying attention to him. And in the middle of the formula, he's written "worms in my brain, please help" or something of that nature. And I even forget what the caption read. But I was having a day at work and that popped into my head, and it was so random. I just wrote it down, as I often did on Post-it notes, just little lines or dialogue that just pops up from the ether in my brain. And so that's where the short story kernel came from.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then years later, while actively resisting this book from turning into a novel, even though it was getting longer and longer and longer as I worked on it, my wife discovered a lump on her breast. And for a period of about 3.5 weeks, maybe a month, I found myself in this weird sort of limbo, waiting to find out, okay, is it malignant or not? So she had it biopsied. And I found myself in this in this position where I had to start considering a lot of things that I didn't think I would have to consider until like 70 or 80, until I was 70 or 80 years old. And that's, what if this is the worst case scenario? What if for some reason it's not treatable? It's not, or it's aggressive, or it's already spread and we caught it too late.
Mm-hmm.
And, what, one, like, how am I going to process this? Two, how am I going to survive? Because Erica and I have been together, let's see, 21 years this year.
Wow.
And we've been married for most of those, 17 years of that. We're both neurodivergent. We're both on the spectrum. Both suffer from ADHD. And it just happens to work out that things that I'm not okay with, she is, and vice versa. So we really gel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I handle the finances and bills and paying all of those on time. If somebody's got to make a phone call, she does that. Stuff like that. And I really started to consider like how much of my life I've only been half paying attention to because she's paid attention to that half and vice versa. And I really started to think about, okay, I would like be losing half of myself if I lost her. And how do I pick up the pieces from that? How would you move on from that? And, I saw myself at a much older age, what would my life look like if I, couldn't move on? And
yeah,
still dealing with the grief of that. And that all found its way into the book that I was working on it while all this was happening. And in a lot of ways, the Sundowner's Dance is my response to that feeling,
mm-hmm.
or that the complex maelstrom of emotion that I was dealing with at the time. And that's the longer answer to that question.
Yeah. As I read it, so it makes perfect sense now with the context of reading your acknowledgments at the end and kind of how you expanded on that, because now thinking of it that way, it absolutely reads like you said to yourself that what you said, what would my life be? What, how would I move on? That kind of thing. And there was just a couple of moments in the book where it just felt so true. And that's why when I originally brought up the topic, I said that it feels like it's something that you lived in, that and there was one, because a few years back, had lymphoma, and I am healthy now, but I'm recovered. I'm a cancer survivor. But I've gone through that experience, and with my girlfriend who, she's still with me now. And there was something that happened at some point. And I don't remember exactly where. I can't pinpoint the moment, but there was something about how, like, sometimes it's harder on the spouse or the partner that came up at some point, and I was like, he doesn't know, or maybe you do know how fucking true that is. And so, yeah, the book just felt real. Like my lived experience connected very strongly with the way the book was written. And to me, that told me, like, this guy really knows the scariness of whatever this situation is.
Yeah. I should mention that Erica's fine.
Thanks.
It was totally benign. It was just a cyst. She just had her annual checkup, and she's free and clear for another year at least. So, yeah, it was a scary period of time, especially in that limbo where it had a biopsy to get sent off to a lab, and you're basically waiting
Mhm.
on pins and needles to find out what it is and what the next step is. And it was like
Yeah.
in that period of time where I was kind of like I was in my own head really deep while also
Yeah.
working on the story.
Um, in my experience, and I don't know if this is the same for everybody, but like when, and we're not going to just talk the whole time about the really sad, scary stuff, but for me, time slowed down as the person who like was going through the thing, where it felt like my mind was on like, what is the next second? What is the next second? Whereas like for her, time sped up. She looked all the way out for like what the whole timeline of things were going to go. So like we were definitely moving at different speeds. And so that experience as I think a partner is definitely different than um, the person with the scare or the real thing. But yeah, like your perspective of like you jumped to what does this look like, you know, and the real, so grief kicked in, I guess, is
Yeah,
what, like, even before you had an answer, you were already grieving.
yeah, that's just the way my brain works. I've always been like that, and I don't know. It's a bit of a perverse gift in a way, I think, because yeah, I can start like picturing the next steps on a worst case scenario, like what happens then, and then this happens, and then this happens. But that's also the same like part of my brain that helps me create a plot.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
it came in
blessing and curse.
handy, even if it hurt the whole time.
Yeah. 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 Well, it had to be somewhat therapeutic, or at least like um helpful to kind of confront the idea by writing about it, hopefully.
Yeah, it was almost like the book is what kept me going at that point,
Yeah.
and I knew I needed to just finish it and get it out of my system, and so that I could move on and focus on other things. But also, it was my way of processing a
Yeah.
lot of what was going on at the time in my life. And you know, I've always been someone who has thought, you know, I try to think 15 to 25 steps ahead. You know, what's going to happen in 6 months? What's going to happen in 6 years? Uh, Again, because I'm always worried about the worst case scenario, and it
Hmm.
helps me to be mentally prepared if this something comes to pass. And on one hand, yeah, that makes me an extreme worrier, uh, but at the same time, it's helpful to me, and with my various neurodivergencies, uh, it's helpful to me so that I'm at least I feel somewhat on solid ground if I'm doing it. And
Right.
I come by it honestly. My mom's the same way. My granny was the same way. And I on the subject of my great grandmother. I mean, she raised me for a good chunk of my early life. And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, I was raised by elderly people. So
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time around the elderly, and not just my elders, but I mean like they were actually elderly.
Yeah.
Um, so in a way, I kind of have that perspective, even though I'm not myself of that age. That makes
Yeah, that makes
sense.
sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that I was inspired in two different directions by what you just said. One is you had said that the way that you and your wife work, like it's very complementary. So if you're, my girlfriend calls it an awfulizer, but like if you're like the worst case scenario person, does she represent the other side of that? Is she like the optimism or the that? So does she balance you out in that way?
She's not necessarily the optimist, but she's more grounded.
Okay.
She's more focused on what's happening right now. What can we logistically do about it? If there's nothing
Mhm.
we can do about it, it's out of our control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I have a hard time accepting what's out of our control and more just, what is our lack of control doing to us? And what is it going
Which
to do?
which is probably super helpful. I have a very similar relationship where my girlfriend is the one who considers everything that could go wrong, and I'm the one who's like, yeah, what's happening in the moment, and how can we move forward? So yeah, um, I feel like that's a good dynamic to have, though. The other thing that you inspired me to think about, growing up around people who are elderly has to help in a situation where you're writing a novel in a retirement community where it's the day to day life of, the protagonist is, I think, in his 70s, and
Yeah.
like the whole community is for the ostensibly also elderly, although there's some tweaks to that. So
Yeah.
is your was your was your lived experience helpful in like even just depicting Jerry, the main character, like his day to day kind of like ups and downs?
I mean, I've written about my great grandmother, Granny, in various ways over the years. Devil's Creek being the biggest one. She's the inspiration for Imogene's character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was coming of age around the time that her mental faculties were starting to fail her. So a lot of my formative memories growing up involved being around her when I was there when she had a debilitating stroke. I She fell in the bathroom one time, and I knew that she was terrified of the ambulance, and they didn't want to, they couldn't afford it because it was,
Mm-hmm.
insurance sucked then as much as it sucks now.
Yeah.
So, it was one of those moments where I had a rush of adrenaline and I picked her up off the ground. I have a lot of acute memories of that period of time. And so being around her, being around the day to day challenges, did I take my pills? Did I take the right pills? She would sit down for like an hour every week and get her pills ready for the week. And some she had to cut in half, some she had to double up. She had to make sure she got them right. And, this is before she was in a facility. She was living
Mm-hmm.
on her own. And, that, and also just there was a routine to her day where, she's retired. She wasn't poor per se, but she, had to watch her money, and she was dependent
Mm-hmm.
on Social Security and everything. And just the routine of her daily was basically the same, you know. And it's like on this day she does the laundry, on this day she does the dishes, and this day, I mean, she was always doing the dishes, but you know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
mowing the lawn. And then when she couldn't do those things, it's like she slowly got lost inside her own head. Like stroke really messed her up and cognitively. Uh, I wrote a story called "Saving Granny from the Devil" in my first collection, "Ugly Little Things," that has a lot of truth. Real things that happened. And one of those was that she thought there was a little girl sitting next to her in a rocking chair. There was no rocking
Yeah.
chair. There was no girl. She thought she saw a man in black staring at her across the road from a window. And, and it was so real to her.
Yep.
It was so real to her. And, dementia runs in my family. It's a legit fear of mine. Because statistically, yeah, I'm going to suffer from it at some point in my life, toward the end of my life. And the idea of the world not making sense to you anymore. You're essentially trapped in a prison of your brain, and the part of your brain that lets you perceive reality is malfunctioning.
Yeah.
So, you're seeing things that aren't there. You're imagining things. You're paranoid. You're worried that somebody's out to harm you, and you don't know why.
Yeah.
And one moment you recognize somebody, and the next moment you forget who they are, and they're a stranger to you. And I've experienced that firsthand. My granny who helped raise me. I walked into her nursing room in the nursing home one time. She didn't know who the fuck I was.
Yeah.
And
I can't even imagine.
That was traumatic for me as a teenager.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but so I have experience with that, and I wanted to take that and then apply it to myself with my eccentricities and my habits. And so what if it was a person who's extremely introverted, who just wants to live out the rest of his life in peace and silence and not be bothered because he's grieving the loss of such a important part of his life. And there's a guy who keeps knocking on his door saying, "Hey, why don't you come on over and participate in this? And, we really want you to participate. You're really part of the community." And there's this clash, I mean, that's good for the story, but also, like that would be my luck, because I'm absolutely the hermit in this scenario.
Well, one thing I want to say is that it's absolutely, and I know that in your acknowledgments you talked about people helping you make sure that you were respectful to the experience of the elderly because they play such a big part in the book, but like you honored the elderly experience, I think, so effectively and efficiently and carefully. It felt like that there, especially in the areas of the book that we can't talk about at the end, which was just tore me to pieces. So it was nice to see that it was a topic that mattered so much to you. And it seemed like it was something that was like, again, like I go back to that thing I said where like this guy knows this because he lived it. But now like I'm inspired to think about, because of that struggle. And I talked to my mother when my grandmother was, in her last years, and she had late stage Parkinson's. And so dementia was, part of that. And one day my mom was her sister, and another day she was her daughter, and another day she was a stranger, and another day she was trying to kill her. And
Yeah.
the weird thing is that even though that had to be so hard for her on a day-to-day basis, she said that she had never been closer to my grandmother. Like in her life leading up to that, they didn't have a close relationship, but at the end, she really was close in a way they never were before. And so even though it was a horrible situation, spending the time and being with her through that had its kind of rewarding element to it as well. Well, I'm just getting really emotional on this one, but
That's okay. It's all right.
this book just really hit me in a very strong way. But because of that, because of the gravity of that situation and how important these relationships are to us and all of that, and understanding that struggle that the people in the twilight years of their life experience, creating this situation where someone's like, what if it could just be all good? Sounds like almost like you would never say no. So like this situation at Fairview Acres is this retirement community that is the thing in the book, and Arthur Peterson, who kind of is the guy in charge, is like, hey, you're here, this is a great community, we're gonna like just have a great life together. Who wouldn't want that? Your answer you already gave is the guy who's introverted and just wants to be alone, but the setup of that situation seems irresistible to someone who has gone through that kind of suffering. So I thought that was a really clever way to create conflict in the situation.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It just, I mean, from a plot perspective, I mean, you need the antagonist to, and the protagonist to butt heads. Otherwise, you have no conflict. But, Arthur seemed like such a nice guy.
Yeah.
And in his mind, he's not doing anything wrong. He's actively helping people. But he's also, only sees people one way. And that ultimately is his downfall when it comes to Jerry. Because Jerry is not the typical resident of Fairview. Because he's neurodivergent, as I am, and he just wants to be left alone, especially when he's hurting. And it wasn't planned. I mean, I'm largely pants most of the stories I write.
Mm-hmm.
And I going into it, I knew that there was going to be an Arthur figure. I just didn't know, like, is he the bad guy? Is he not? That sort of thing. And I tried really hard to make Arthur as likable as possible.
Yeah.
But with that edge, that sharp edge that just grates on Jerry, where at some points, it feels like Jerry's being an asshole. At some points, it feels like that. He's being a cynical asshole, because I very much am a cynical asshole. And, I wanted to explore that dynamic, and, no one has asked this or they haven't picked up on it, but the movie The Burbs was a big inspiration.
Yes.
And Arthur Peterson is named after Tom Hanks's character, Mr. Peterson.
No, I love it.
In the movie. And if you haven't seen that movie, look it up. It's fucking hilarious.
So, can we tangent on that?
Yeah, sure.
Because that was and we'll come back around, but like that, and I'm looking it up because I'm stupid and I don't know off the top of my head. That's always been a movie that I've loved to go back to, because I think it's almost perfect. Like,
yeah,
it's such a good story, and it walks that balance of creepy and funny and just absurd. And I was like, why is this movie so good? And I looked it up. Joe Dante directed it.
Yeah.
Which I never knew. But for anybody who's not familiar, Joe Dante, you would know from, I'm pulling up the credits right now, movies like Piranha, Gremlins, The Howling, like classic, big stuff, and The Burbs. And so I was like, this makes a whole lot more sense now that I know who is responsible for this story, why it resonated the way it did. So I'm sorry I just jumped into what you were saying, but like I'm so
Okay.
excited that you mentioned that, because I had a revelation like a year ago where I was like, holy shit, this movie is important, because for reasons I never understood, I just knew that it was a big deal.
It's the movie, and not to derail this whole conversation, but the movie is very much a microcosm of any neighborhood Facebook group,
Oh my god,
because
that's so true.
it's a Facebook group before there's social media. How one neighbor's eccentricity is talked about enough that it snowballs into this huge conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a part of my town, my small town's Facebook group, and they're always bitching about something from the most from legitimate things to the most minuscule harmless thing. And it I always think that they're one or two steps away from somebody dying at all times.
Yeah.
Like, if this somebody's gonna say something and it's gonna piss someone off just enough, you know.
Yeah.
And it's very much, I feel like the dynamic between Tom Hanks and, I don't know the actor's name, Art, I think the character's name is, and Bruce Dern's character,
Mm-hmm.
how they all just kind of feed off of each other, trying to figure out what happened to, Walter down at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Yep.
What happened and why did he disappear? And then there's this weird ass family next door, the Klopeks. Obviously they have something to do with it. And, I don't want to spoil the movie, of course, but definitely, if any of this sounds amusing to you, or just from even a sociological perspective, go watch this movie.
Yeah. It's yeah, and you even not to spoil anything, but at one point name drop
Yeah,
Klopek. Yeah, so that is in there.
because and I always joke to my wife about this, but like, we are the Klopeks on our street. Like, we're the house that the kids skip. We're the house with the dead grass and the leaves. And if you step onto the yard, the wind starts blowing in an ominous way.
Oh,
That's in the neighborhood dynamic. That's my aspiration, because people leave them the fuck alone
I mean, it's effective.
for the most part, anyway.
So you drive to the end of your driveway to put your garbage in the garbage can.
No, but I do take out my trash around midnight
Yeah.
because I just don't think about it
Yeah.
until it's super late and like, shit, the trash is gonna go tomorrow. I got to do this.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that we had a Burbs tangent. If I was smarter, I would have just brought it up because it's such a good movie. So it makes me happy that it actually does like it affect the DNA of the story to some degree. But so for any here's the question I have. Um, in promotional stuff, online for this book, and the blurbs that you've gotten, cosmic horror is mentioned, but how much can we say about that stuff without kind of breaking the story for anybody who hasn't read it yet? Like, I'm
Uh,
worried about revealing things that shouldn't be revealed.
so I will say that this is a cosmic horror story, and I saw one early review say that it's a love story wrapped in a cosmic horror story, and I would say that's correct.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is cosmic horror. this is a big part of my Southland mythos. My next novel even references some of the, something from Sundowner's Dance, even though it's not taking place down in like Kentucky, West Virginia, part of Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
Poconos is part of that range, and so that's why I consider it a Southland story. I mean, I pitched this to agents, and then once I landed my agent, we pitched it as Cocoon meets The Color Out of Space. And with most of my work, especially I'm focused on Southland material going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Short fiction, long fiction, doesn't matter. All of it's going to have this cosmic subtext. So I'm definitely more interested in the personal dynamics of how one navigates a cosmic horror story. Like, we're insignificant in the universe, of course we are, but we still have to go to work, we still have to go, we still have to do this stuff. So there's very much the human element in a cosmic horror story, and that's what interests me. But cosmic horror in general, speaks to a lot of my personal philosophy when it comes to, the meaningless of the universe, of the meaning, how meaningless human existence really is in the grand scope of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that's kind of, or some people find that self-defeating. I would call freeing in a lot of ways, because it's like, well, if none of this matters, then I can do anything.
I totally am with you on that.
100%. And I find that empowering.
Yeah.
So to get back to your point, we can't really say a lot about the cosmic horror elements, but if listeners and viewers are paying attention, the worms in my brain dance at nightfall is a pretty big tell.
That's and honest, and I always want to give the reader the best chance at a clean experience. And so like this one felt like we probably aren't going to touch directly on the cosmic horror thing much, but like the fact that you put it in the context of like this story lives in the universe of your other stories that also have a cosmic horror element, then that's just the playing field. And so it's not spoiling anything. It's just like, well, expect this kind of thing. So I like the way that you framed that. That's a really smart way to do that. That being said, I caught one Easter egg mention of something outside of Sundowner's Dance. And I'm sure there is, anybody who's just listening to the audio, a cat just entered the screen. And so you're really missing out if you're not watching the YouTube video. Everybody loves cats. So
of course,
I caught one little Easter egg, which was there was a news broadcast that mentioned a nearby town, something happening to a nearby town. And so I'm assuming that's a direct reference to Devil's Creek.
Yeah. Small Kentucky town burns to the ground. It's like news report, like a follow-up, like a year later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there other little crumbs to other stories?
That's the big one.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
It's so fleeting, but anybody.
It's been a while since I've looked at the manuscript, so it's we wrapped up final edits for that end of last year.
Yeah.
That's the big one. That's the big one that comes to mind. There are probably others, some that I'm even unaware of, that just subconsciously work their way in.
I always love
that's all I got on that one.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that I caught that one, because usually like I'll read something and then someone else will have read it too, and they'll be like, "Oh, did you catch this and this and this?" And I'm like, "I got one of them, and I was proud of that." So maybe I'll feel good about myself. um, so the title, "The Sundowners Dance," um, in the basically by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, "Oh, this is more significant than maybe my naive person coming in to start reading this book realized." And in the book, you mentioned even it's in the I think the synopsis for it, Sundowner's syndrome.
Yeah,
So it's a form of dementia. That's a real thing, right?
yeah,
And
yeah. It's real.
so is Sundowner's Dance an actual term in reference to that syndrome, or is that something that you can't? This is just me not knowing. So
It's not an official term that I'm
okay.
aware of. If it's total coincidence, if it is, uh, I was looking at ways that people manage someone suffering from sundown syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and like a routine kind of thing, and the aspect of one character, she would dance, she would kind of dance with her husband when he was suffering from it, and that comes back in in the story. uh that was all just out of the ether. But sundown syndrome is a real thing. It's bizarre, honestly. Some people who suffer from dementia begin to experience amplified symptoms as after the sun goes down, and a lot of
Yeah,
it
that's
is like has to do with circadian rhythms. Lack of sleep can trigger it, a severe lack of sleep, and the lack of sleep stems from the severe paranoia that comes from being too afraid to sleep because someone might come and get you, someone might break into your house, someone might hurt, wants to harm you. um so that's a whole thing. And like my wife's grandmother, in her last couple of years of her life, she suffered from it. She got really mean.
I can imagine.
uh
Yeah.
yeah, she got borderline violent. uh and It's just another form of this debilitating disease that affects the elderly. And the book did have other titles. um I don't have it in front of me, but I had a list of like 10 different titles for the book. And usually when I start a story, I have a title in mind
Mm-hmm.
already. That's part of my process. um but this one kept changing. It was, by the eye of the moon, by the moon's eye, uh, the Sundowners, you know, the Sundowners Dance, the Fairview Acres Horror, the stuff. Some of them were really bad. Some of them were strong candidates.
Sure.
The Sundowners Dance was so different, and it obviously it tied in with the, an aspect of the story. There's a couple of anchor points in the story that it, kind of becomes clear as to why it's titled this. Um, it was so different and not what you'd expect, from a cosmic horror novel. So, I went with that, and when I sent it to my agent, she didn't recommend me I change the title. So,
Yeah, I mean that's an endorsement for sure.
yeah,
Um, I know that I'm going to the serious stuff a lot.
okay,
But like, there's a couple of just general ideas that I wrote down. There's an element of control or losing control that is kind of a theme throughout.
yeah,
So we talked about the grief aspect of it, but control and And then I also said dignity. So like I wrote down control and I wrote down dignity. Um, the control thing, you're when you get to a certain age. I'm 46 now, and the last time I went to the eye doctor is the first time in my life I've needed progressive lenses, and there's nothing that you can do to stop that. That is something that is completely out of your control. It is inevitable, and it's going to happen. Um, and so a lot of things like that happen when you're in your when you're elderly, that are just things that you can't control, and like depending on how cheery you are about stuff, that can be really hard. And so there was an element in here about control as it came to like how can you be in control of your life, and what that looks like at that age. That was a theme that I think was very, very important to the story, especially with the kind of side element that is something we can't talk about. Um, and so yeah, I don't even know what my question is, but like yeah, the idea of control or losing control, and then tying into it just like the loss of dignity and like how much weight that has to put on you, I think was something that was explored very nicely in here too.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I wanted to explore that early on because that was something that, going back to my granny, that was something that she wrestled with because after that major stroke, she lost most of the use of her, I think it was her left side of her
Mm.
body. So she couldn't drive anymore because she just didn't have reaction time. And, you know, she, so in the couple of years after that stroke, she always used to say, like, when you learn how to drive, we're going to go all over town and you're
Oh,
going to take me
buddy.
places. And, it's like, yeah, of course, Granny, I'll take you wherever you want to go. But it's the harsh realization that you don't have the freedom to do what you want anymore. You now have to rely on someone. And in a lot of ways, you've seen, the sayings, how like, we're born crawling and then we die crawling. It's
Yeah.
like we walk in the middle. It's like you basically regress back to an infant state before you die
Mm-hmm.
as you get, when you're old. And, that to tie that in with your comment about dignity, you go from having your faculties and whatnot to, okay, so now you have to get up a couple of times in the night to take a piss, and then eventually you just piss yourself.
Yeah.
And someone who normally has been able to, get up, take care of themselves, at some point, you're gonna get to a point in your life, if you live long enough, where, maybe you have to wear a diaper. A lot of elderly folks do. And there's no shame in it.
Yeah.
It's something that happens, but from a human pride, point of view, that absolutely is debilitating. It's like, great, well, now I can't control when I shit myself,
Yep.
or when I shit. And now I'm shitting myself, I'm peeing myself, and it makes you feel, it really attacks your pride, it attacks your feelings of being an independent person. Now you have to rely on a caretaker to come and, clean you up and make sure give you a bath. And to go from being a completely independent, fully functional adult to that, um, it has debilitating effects on one's emotional state and one's psyche. And, depression is common. Granny suffered from depression, um, in her later years because it got to a point where, all the grandkids had moved away. I was in college, and, everybody else has a full time job and families. My grandmother is also getting older, so she can't take care of Granny, her mother. So there was no choice but, she had to go to a nursing home. And then her mental state just declined rapidly after that because
Yeah.
now she's in a place with strangers. She can't take care of herself. She doesn't see familiar faces every day,
Right.
And it's like pieces of yourself slowly begin to erode,
Yeah.
over time, and, gravity and entropy, essentially. So I think, going back to the cosmic horror aspect of it, for a moment, I think the concept of aging and regression like that is very much at home in a cosmic horror story,
Mm-hmm.
because you're losing yourself, and you're also, realizing in the insignificance of the vast universe that your insignificance. And, you could probably find other connections in that, but my throat is dry and I need to take a drink.
No, that's and that totally, the connection totally makes sense. Like the and I think control has a lot to do with that. If you feel like you can't make the world be what you want it to be, you don't have control. That leads to a feeling of insignificance. So I'll tell you a personal story. I'm not going to just beat the cancer drum all night, but when I was going through all my treatments and stuff like that, there was in an apartment. I lived in this apartment on the second floor of a building, and the laundry was on the first floor. And in the kind of like hardest moments of going through treatment, I was doing laundry, and I went down and did and when I was going back to switch the laundry over, it's 15 stairs, and that exhausted me just taking the stairs. And I was so angry that I had lost the ability to just walk upstairs, and I had to give myself the grace of being like, dude, you're being poisoned right now. Like, there's a legitimate reason for this, but you do feel small and you feel ineffective when you lose faculties like that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's perfect for, like you're saying, like a cosmic horror situation. Yeah.
Definitely.
So I'm gonna pivot away from story a little bit, because there's a lot more other stuff I want to touch on. But wrapping up the idea of the Sundowners dance, we had to really not touch the cosmic horror stuff for the sake of like preserving the reading experience for anybody who hasn't read it yet. And you absolutely should, because it's a fantastic fucking book. But what was I going to say? Hell, it's just, it's so emotionally powerful. And I will say that I'm not going to say how the ending made me feel, but as I started reading this book in the beginning, grief plays a part at the very start. And as I started reading this book, I was talking to my girlfriend, and I was like, holy shit, listen to this. And I read a couple of passages here and there. And she's like, you're going to cry this whole book, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to cry this whole book. So
Sorry, not sorry.
No, it's just a very emotionally powerful thing. But the thing I will say is that there is a good balance that's represented in the stuff that we can't talk about. So it's just not a nonstop sad fest or a nonstop emotion fest. Like, it balances very well to that other element that we just can't talk about. So I don't want someone to go out of this thinking like, oh, I'm not going to read about dementia for 300 pages. Like, we just can't talk about the stuff that kind of counterbalances that. So
Yeah,
that's,
like something I talked to Haley Newland for Cemetery Dance Online last week, actually, and something that she touched upon that is absolutely correct. Like, the story has this old school pulp sci-fi horror element to it. It is very much a pulpy, like weird tales kind of story.
yeah.
And in a lot of ways, like when I was writing it, it was a cosmic horror story first. And the grief and the emotional charge of it came, I felt, which kind of, in an earlier draft, kind of just stapled onto it. And then we refined that and made it a smoother experience, for the final version. Um, there's very much a pulpy, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Pulpy intent to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pulp sci-fi horror Lovecraftian kind of story in my mind before it was anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And it became this, it went from that to being an examination of neighborhood social dynamics to then, really drilling into the grief aspects and, the idea of getting old and losing someone important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it all kind of went into this stew, but the base was always pulpy horror,
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, it's just an interesting, it's an important distinction for anybody who's just listening to this conversation and might make a decision off of that. That it's more than what I was, the things that I was like harping on about, like you said. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that people know it does have that feel that you're saying. And they don't just think I don't want to be depressed.
And I'd like to think that there are some moments of levity in it as well.
Oh yeah.
But, there's one of my favorite lines that I am so happy survived multiple rounds of edits was, toward like the last third of the book, Jerry, the main character, has a neighbor across the street named Gary, and he's a gardener of sorts, but he's also kind of like a lookout. He's keeping an eye on Jerry.
Mm-hmm. A
And
real busybody.
There's a part where Jerry is snippy to someone, and the guy says, that wasn't very nice. And he says, why don't you fuck off to your garden, Gary? I love that line.
Oh yeah, it is good. Yeah. So it's a well balanced story with I want to say a great cover, and I know that that's important to you as someone
Yes.
who does book art. Oh, it's so beautiful. So you do book covers, you do interior art for whatever you call it for books and stuff. So, but this isn't your design, right?
No. I sent the title design to Alan, and he made it his own.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else about this is all Alan at Shortwave.
Oh, this is Alan. Alan is the artist for the cover.
Yes.
Wow, good for him. I like what he does.
So do I, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to work with him, because he's probably one of only a handful of publishers in the independent horror space right now that one appreciates design and also understands how important it is.
Mm.
And that alone is, reason one for me wanting to work with him. But yeah, he's a fantastic designer and an artist in his
It's
own
kind of
right.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. He's multi-talented. He's a filmmaker. He's an audiophile, and he is an amazing designer. And
Yeah.
That, as someone who designs stuff for a living, like, to find someone who gets it,
Yeah.
and that you can just, I have utmost faith and trust in his ability. So, to the point that I had an idea for the cover that was very much like an homage to the VHS cover of the Burbs.
Which would
But
be awesome.
but he took a stab at it, but it wasn't really working, and I wasn't really feeling it. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and then one day he sends me this cover, and I'm just like, holy shit, that's it. You nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. I've liked like most of, if not all of the covers and stuff I've seen from Shortwave, but this one definitely stands out as like, even just like the typeset and stuff like that. Yeah. I think it's great. I think it really works out
Yeah,
well.
it's, in a lot of cases you'll find artists who are illustrators. They are very good at making the artwork, but they don't have the design sense to really find a good font choice to complement the art, and it just
Yep.
kind of feels slapped on there and it looks unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
Alan is a rare talent that has both. He has a good sense of both, and he knows a good font when he sees one, and he can nerd out to fonts like I can, because I'm not a good illustrator. I'm okay at photo manipulation, but I'm not a good illustrator. I couldn't paint something and then use that for a cover. But I'm a good designer, and there's a difference between having good art and having good design. Good
Mm-hmm.
art may not always have good design, and that's something that a lot of especially those in the indie space, don't really understand. It's like, okay, artists do not always make good designers, or illustrators don't make good designers, and sometimes designers don't make good illustrators.
Yeah.
It's, they're very specified. They're very specific. Uh, you know,
Like skill
forms of
sets.
study. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, dude, so I guess the thing that I don't know, because I haven't received my copy yet, I'm doing the, if anybody's watching the video, this is the Q1 Shortwave box, which actually, I had a shoe box that I put all my, like, what I call book swag in. So like if something comes with like a sticker or a button or like a bookmark, I was just throwing it all in a shoe box. So now this is my book swag. Pull it out and get my like Paul Bear's Club button or whatever. Um, so I haven't seen it yet because I'm waiting for the Q2 box, which I actually messaged Alan and I was like, that pamphlet that was made for Fairview Acres as like a swag thing.
I have a whole box of them. They are right there.
Nice.
They're right there.
Well, he confirmed to me that the Kickstarter folks are going to get that in the box.
Yeah.
So excited about that. But because I love tie-in stuff like that.
Yeah, I
Um,
pitched that idea to him very early on, and he didn't have the bandwidth for it, so I did it. And I had
nice.
a lot of fun just finding like stock imagery of elderly people having, they're enjoying their golden years, but also they kind of fit the people that I had in mind,
Mhm.
uh, images that I had in my head of the characters. So yeah, I'm excited for people to get that. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time looking at various brochures for retirement communities.
What a fun side project. That's great.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it.
There was one for the reason I like pamphlets. They don't always make sense. Like not every book can have a tie-in like brochure, but Rob Hart's book, The Warehouse, when that came out, there was a brochure they made for the like cloud service that was mentioned in the book, like the fake cloud
Cool.
service. So I got that, and I was really excited about that. So like I got probably way more jazzed about a brochure pamphlet thing than I should have, but I was like, there's no way I'm not getting this thing. But that's a side thought. I what I was getting to is there any design elements inside the book, or is it a pretty straightforward layout situation?
It's a pretty straightforward layout. We use the Fairview logo that I made is like the section break image,
Cool.
but no, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a clean,
Nice. Yeah.
typesetting.
And it's
The
unique.
one thing
in
I
that,
will say is that the boards of the book are printed.
Oh yes, that is so good. I can't tell you how great that is. Like when you get good attention to detail like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can find it really quick, because one of my favorite examples. I move my bookshelves around so much. Here it is. I don't know if you've read it, but
I haven't.
the hardcover of Piranesi by Susanna Clark.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then the pages on the inside.
Yeah.
So I just love when there's design. The boards, a sucker. Like I'm a total sucker for it.
Oh, so am I. I wish more publishers would, do stuff with that.
Yeah,
because it is something that Ingram offers, with the printing. So like everybody can do that.
Well, and your book is unique in that, first of all, Shortwave's called Shortwave for a reason. They typically go for shorter long form stuff, and this is a straight up 360 page beast of a novel. So it's kind of occupying a rare space on the Shortwave catalog, unless Alan's change in direction. I feel like that's kind of unique too.
Yeah, it's only the second novel that Shortwave has published. I'm sure there are more to come.
Yeah.
But I was very honored that he wanted to take this chance on my story, and I'm very grateful for that, because I think that it's an important story that is going to blindside people a little bit if they're familiar with my work.
Yeah. And then everybody who I've talked to about working with Shortwave has just absolutely raved about it. And so I'm going to give you the opportunity to break that streak or continue the streak.
Oh, no, I will. Shortwave is on a very, no pun intended, short list of publishers in the independent space that I will work with again.
Yeah.
And so when we were shopping the novel, after we had exhausted every mid-list press and large big five press and all their, hydro-like imprints, because they all have like 10,000 imprints.
Exactly. Yeah.
After we had exhausted that, I sent Becky, my agent, these are the indie presses that I would want to pitch to. Shortwave is at top of the list.
Yeah.
I've not had a 5 out of 5 positive experience with any publisher except for Shortwave and Ghoulish.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And I would happily work with them again, and Shortwave doubly so.
yeah. From a reader's perspective, everything that I've touched, I've thought. I mean, I've enjoyed, but I've also just thought like the quality and the attention to detail, the professionalism, like every aspect of the approach of
Yes,
making the books has been. It's obvious that there's someone who knows what they're doing and cares what they're doing. At least that's the impression I'm getting. So it's heartening to hear that. On top of that, the author experience is also kind of the same.
there's a respect for the craft. There's a respect for time, and how long it takes to create something, and the effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into one of these projects. And Alan gets it because he's an artist and he's a writer as well, and he he respects the process, he respects the presentation. He understands that the presentation is half the battle. And
Which, yeah,
like if you can't, getting someone to do a double take and pick up your book on a shelf, if it's on a shelf, that's half the battle.
mm-hmm.
And from there, it's the writer's job to maintain that connection. But Alan nails it every time so far. No pressure, Alan.
No pressure, Alan. But like, even just looking at the box that he created to send
Yeah.
out the quarterly things for from the Kickstarter, he designed a whole like bookstore and incorporated, book covers and references to stories as like the decoration on the outside of the bookstore. Who goes to that level? Like who goes
Well,
that far?
when I first signed with him, he sent me a few of their titles, and they came in boxes like this.
Oh wow, yeah. Uh-huh.
Like he designs, like these are for direct orders that come through the Shortwave, shop, and he designs special boxes for them. I mean, no one else does this.
And I work my day job. I work in basically a swag company. So we make swag for people. I know that is not it's not cheap to do that kind of thing.
No, it's not.
It's not a thrifty experience to make a box like that. But it makes a splash. It makes an impression. Like even the general Shortwave box looks great, and then the Killer VHS series boxes look great.
Like that's how you go from just having a one-off sale to having a customer for life.
Yeah,
for someone who's going to buy everything you publish.
I did that with this book. Narcissus by Adam Godfrey was the first one that I kind of like saw, and I was like, this cover, the story sounds good. The cover looks fantastic. And it brought me in, and then so I got it from Shortwave, and it came in that box, and I was like, oh, who are these people? And immediately I was like, I need to look deeper. I need to like explore more. So that little flourish or detail makes a difference to people. Yeah. So that's the Shortwave commercial. But every single author, so I've talked to Adam. He had a great experience with them. I'm looking at my shelf. I talked to Chloe Spencer about mewing. Great experience. I talked to Josh Milliken about teleportasm. I talked to Nat Cassidy with Rest Stop. I talked to Clay McCall Chapman with his chapbooks, which, by the way, let's acknowledge the fact that chapbooks exist. That's fantastic, and I want way more of that. Because
I mean, a lot of my short fiction isn't exactly short. And like my story from Cold Black and Infinite, The Smile Factory, began as a chapbook.
Yeah.
And
that's
to
awesome.
find a publisher who actually enjoys doing chapbooks, and they print them in house, and they,
Mhm.
it's nuts. It's so out of the realm of what we're used to. And the
Yeah.
fact that, Shortwave does this, it's one of the things they love to do, is awesome. We need more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm noticing that Rapture Publishing is another one now that theirs is kind of like an exclusive kind of top shelf chapbook situation, but what they're doing is fantastic. And I'm like, please just make this a trend, because um I would just devour it. Book design. I did want to talk about, so like this question's gonna be a terrible setup because I'm blanking on specific projects, but like I listened to you on other podcasts and I'd heard you talking about some of like the projects that you've got to work on for books. And so what are some of the interesting things you're doing on that side of your creative existence, or professional, I guess, creative existence?
So I am a book designer. I do covers. I do interiors. Interiors are what I'm known for. I do occasionally do a cover. In the indie space, budgets are tight, and you know, I I don't always get hired for covers because you know it's expensive.
Yeah.
If they want art along with the design isn't that bad. Um, the design is usually what I do. I usually will take the art that the publisher has and I'll make it into a cover. I'll format it. I will, do the textual design, typography, and that kind of becomes it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book, because ideally, if I'm doing a cover design, I'm also doing an interior design. That means that I can take the design from the cover or elements from the cover and I can reproduce that in the interior. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of ties it together thematically in a physical space. Um, so examples would be uh, The Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors by Bad Hand Books, that anthology. I also have a story in that. Uh, you know, Doug came to me with a concept and we refined it, and he basically he gave me free reign to do whatever I wanted, which ended up costing him because it's the cost of printing. They couldn't reproduce the darks so
Oh,
well. So yeah, that was a learning experience for both of us. But I mean, I so far, knock wood, have been Bad Hands designer. Uh, you know,
not
for
a speck of light as well, right?
so I didn't do the cover design on that. That was Michael Bailey. But I did do the interior. I reproduced the Michael Bailey's design because I didn't have the original files. I
Mm.
reproduced it in the interior. I'm currently working on the hardcover edition of Not a Speck of Light. So I did the cover design for Silk and Sinew, the new anthology coming out for Bad Hand. I've done work for Chiroptera Press for their limited editions of like Thomas Ligotti's work,
Oh, wow.
um, like Crampton, Michigan Basement. I did the design for the interior design for Fabio Frizzi's autobiography. He was a composer who worked with Lucio Fulci, and it's basically it's an amazing book. It's uh, basically his life and working with Fulci and you know composing these scores for these films. I've done design work for Ruidon Books. They're a new press. I just did a thing for B. Castro with Planet Tepesh. Most recently, I did a full cover for Third Estate with Black Out the Stars. I forget the author's name.
Did you do Pink Agave Motel, or am I thinking of someone
I did
else?
the interior for that. Yeah, I
Okay.
did the
Yeah,
interior
yeah, yeah.
for the first edition of Eric LaRocca's Everything That Darkness Eats, Clash.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I did that. I also did a cover for that, but they ended up using something a bit more. sedated.
Yeah, they went. Yeah. Wow,
Yeah,
that's heavy too. There's every page has stuff
yeah.
on it. Like that's. Sorry to interrupt what you were saying. I'm
No,
just
no, it's
excited.
fine.
But
Like I usually, when it comes to a full design like that, where they want art and everything, I talk to the author. I kind of get a feel for what the book's about, the themes, the mood, and I try to find, I try to create art that reflects that, and incorporate that into the book in different ways, so that it becomes more than just, oh, I'm reading a paperback book. No, you're having an experience, because now there's graphical elements to back up what you're reading. And I did the interiors, 2 covers and 3 interiors for the last 3 StokerCon anthologies.
oh, cool, very
Um,
cool.
yeah, I did 2 heavy photo manipulation, heavy covers for them in the last couple of years. Uh, I also did the interior design for Annie Neugebauer's upcoming collection. You Have to Let Them Bleed. Let's see. I mean, I've actually lost track of how many I've done. Uh, you just go back to last year. There's one on the tip of my tongue, and I can't think. Oh, Grim Death. Mike Mignola and Thomas Nagoski's novella. It's like a grim death as a character, and the electrocuted criminal, I think it's called. I did the cover design for that, and getting to work with Mike's artwork to make a cover
Yeah.
is so fucking cool. Uh, you know, it's I did interior design for Ross Jeffries' Harvesting the Nightmare. I'm kind of all over the place, and it's not just. I don't just do books. I mean, I've done logo design. It's not my favorite, but I've done it. Table runner designs. I just did one for Patrick Barb.
Oh, nice.
But interior typesetting, formatting, and design, overall design of the book is, my bread and butter. And go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. What that makes me think is that it's got to be satisfying then too that you can you had said before, like, how you try to create a situation where, like, it not enhances the story, but like it respects the story. But to me, it sounds like it would be more immersive. Like
Yeah,
it's another dimension to support the story and the experience of the story. So that's got to be a rewarding experience, especially if you're
yeah.
working with people that you really respect or
It's.
admire.
I mean, I've done it for my own work as well. The Cemetery Dance edition of Devil's Creek is basically that concept to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Because there's 5 parts to that book, and each one it gets darker and darker. So like the pages slowly start to get grimier and grimier
Mm-hmm.
as you go along. Stuff like that. I love doing
That's
some.
awesome. That is so cool. I had heard you. I remember now hearing you somewhere talk about that Cemetery Dance edition and how, like, the pages get darker, and I'm like, that's fucking smart. Who thinks of that? So that's pretty cool.
The Sundowner's Dance is a book about grief. It's about loss. It's about starting over. It's about mortality. It's also about worms. And I'm not going to give you more context than that, but the elevator pitch for that we pitched to publishers, and that ultimately what got us in the door at Shortwave, is Sundowner's Dance is Cocoon meets The Color Out of Space.
I'm going to ask you the thing that I always kind of feel guilty asking, because you are, and it's because I read the book. And when I read a book that I like, I want more. And so you're in the position where you have to promote this thing, And I'm in a position where I'm like, what's next? And so that always feels a little bit kind of like a betrayal of the
Oh
person that I'm
no,
interviewing.
not at all. Listen,
But like,
you'll never have a problem getting writers to talk about what they're working on.
good, because I've always been like, they have to be like, what the fuck, man? Can you just let me talk about this thing? But yeah, like what's on the horizon after Sundowner's Dance for you?
So, last year I wrapped up the first draft of a novel called Revelation Road. It is not a direct sequel to Devil's Creek, but it's probably the closest thing we'll get. Um, that is the story of two troubled women, one of whom is an artist, one of whom, well, they're both artists, one of whom comes from a deranged family in the backwoods of eastern Kentucky. And one day, said lady's family tracks her down because she ran away a long time ago. And they kidnap her to take her back home. And it's the story of her girlfriend who sets off on a journey from Detroit, Michigan to eastern Kentucky, in the small town of Revelation, which does not exist. Don't go looking for it. To get her back. And there are, pardon the pun, revelations about both of them. And it's all in the context of the Southland mythos and what happened at Devil's Creek. And what happened at Devil's Creek has implications in the world and how this all ties in. And it's a revenge story. It's a chase story. It's a road story. All of it takes place in the span of 24 hours.
Oh, I love that.
And heavily inspired by Dean Koontz's Intensity. It's equal parts Intensity by way of Vanishing Point, 1971 film, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In terms of like family dynamics.
Wow.
It's a story about lovers. It's a story about bad mothers. Definitely. And it was a tough novel to write, and I'm glad a draft of it exists now because it was floating around in my head for too long. And I can't wait for people to read it. We don't have, we're still in the editing phase of it, but my hope is that it will find an audience and find a publisher and an audience soon after. It is not what people will expect from a follow-up to Devil's Creek. It does have some references to what happens in the Sundowner's Dance. I think I mentioned that already. And it also expands the world a little bit. It expands the world of the Southland, and it ties in with some of my short fiction as well. It's another tentpole story in that larger mythos. If that makes sense.
That's awesome. That is really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited for people to read that one. I mean, I'm excited for people to read my work every time, but Revelation Road, to me, it feels special in a lot of ways.
Oh, I mean, I can't wait. So I'm looking forward to the announcement for when that gets actually announced. But in the meantime, I mean, everybody should check out the Sundowner's Dance because it's such a fantastic book. And I think that there's a lot of relatability to it. Like it's got a lot of elements to it that are easy for us to tap into our own kind of like personal experience, like relatable experience. And so I think it's going to be easy to get into, and it's just so well done. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and so I think, on a logistical level, pre-orders are open with like a little special treat. The brochure thing we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
So if you pre-order directly from Shortwave, you can pre-order and get like that little extra kind of brochure thing that I was like so
They
excited about.
also,
So,
I think the first 300 orders, pretty sure it's 300. The first 300 orders will also receive a signed book plate as well.
oh well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So usually I point people to bookshop.org, but in the case of like a special situation where you get extra goodies, I always point people to the special situation. So Shortwave, do the
Hey,
pre-order there for the good stuff.
but there's nothing wrong with bookshop.org either.
I know.
Wherever you get your books, you can pre-order it. Amazon finally fixed their glitch. You can pre-order there if that's your thing. I don't recommend it because Amazon fucking blows. But Bookshop, order direct. I will also be making some, bookstore appearances, and as recent as next a week from now, I'll be in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I will have approximately 35 copies on hand a month in advance of its release. So first come, first serve, though. So you got to show up.
I always show up too late for those things. Like there was one time in Chicago, Clash was at a thing, and they had early copies of the hardcover of Everything the Darkness Eats with the new cover and everything.
Uh-huh.
And I went the second day of that thing, and that was not the day to go to get. I missed it. So
it's happened to me too at StokerCon in Pittsburgh. So this is a couple years now. Clay Chapman announced on social media that he had a box of ARCs of What Kind of Mother, and he was in the hotel lobby. I was in my hotel room at the time. I ran downstairs, and they were fucking gone. They were gone already. Like 5 minutes, they were gone.
Oh, I would just be so crestfallen.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, I was going to buy the book anyway.
Yeah, of course. Well, Todd, I really want to thank you for coming back and talking to me again, this time about the Sundowners Dance. I've raved about it. I just need you to know that it's one of the favorite books I've read in a while, and I really appreciate you making such a great book and coming on to talk to me about it.
Thank you for allowing me to come on your show and vibe for an hour and a half.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah.
No, like I really appreciate being on here. It's a great podcast, and thank you for reading my work.
We will be back for the next one.
Awesome.